How are we to understand the verse in the Ten Commandments, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadosho?
Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadosho. This oft-repeated pasuk from Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, needs to be learned, needs to be studied in order to be understood correctly. Many people, if asked to explain this pasuk, will say that the commandment is to remember et Yom HaShabbat, the day of the Sabbath, lekadosho, to sanctify it, to make it holy. In other words, they understand the word, the first word, Zachor, as a command. That is to say, remember. You are commanded to remember. And then, of course, you could ask, remember when? Remember how? What does that mean exactly, to remember? The problem is that that is not what the pasuk says. You see, Hebrew, the Hebrew language, the holy tongue, Lashon HaKodesh, is a very delicate and fine instrument. And the slightest, most minor, apparently minor, change, even of one vowel in the word, such as Zachor, makes a very major difference. If the word Zachor was to be understood as a command, if that's how it should be understood, then it would not be written as it is written. It would not say Zachor with a Chomes under the Zayin, the first letter, the vowel Chomes. It would have a Shawa under the Zayin. It would say Zachor, Zachor, but not Zachor. The difference, I know, to many ears might sound very hard even to discern, but there is definitely a difference in Hebrew when properly understood and properly pronounced between Zachor and Zachor. The word Zachor with a Chomes is written with that vowel under that first letter, the Zayin, because it is the infinitive, the general form of the verb, to remember. In other words, it is not a command, you are to remember. The makor, the infinitive, general, unspecified, uninflected form of the verb, of any verb in Hebrew, which is called Surat HaMakor. The makor comes to describe the concept, the idea of remembrance, of remembering, of being in a state of awareness of something. That is the true meaning of the word Zachor at Yom HaShabbat lekadosho, as Rashi explicitly states in his Perush on the Torah. Rashi writes, Zachor Lashon Pa'olhu. This is a classic example, by the way, where Rashi is explaining the true and profound Peshat, the true and deep, plain meaning of the words of the Torah. In the Perush of Rashi on the Torah we find many types of Perushim, many kinds of comments, some of them of an Agadic nature, and some of them, many, such as the one before us, are entirely grammatical, that is to say, explaining the true meaning of the word involved. And Rashi has almost no competition, as it were, when it comes to explaining the true, straightforward meaning of the words of the Torah. Rashi spends much effort and time in his Perush on the Torah in doing just this. And here Rashi writes, Zachor Lashon Pa'olhu, Kamo Achol Ushatho, the Pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Kaf Bet, chapter 22, where it speaks about Achol Ushatho, eating and drinking. Not he is eating, or we shall eat, or you are to eat. Achol Ushatho simply means eating and drinking. It is the general makor, the infinitive general form or unspecified form, that's more precise than saying infinitive, the unspecified, uninflected source form of the verb, which simply describes the action. Achol, eating. Shathor, drinking. And similarly, Rashi brings another pasuk from Sefer Shmuel, Haloch uvacho, describing someone who was walking and crying as he was walking. Haloch uvacho. It doesn't say he was walking. It doesn't say he shall walk or anything of the sort. It simply describes the general concept of walking and crying. Haloch uvacho. And the same is true of this pasuk, says Rashi. Zochor et yom HaShabbat lekadesho means, and Rashi explains, V'chen pitrono, and this is what it means. Tanu lev lizkor tamid et yom HaShabbat. Take note, make an effort, be constantly aware to remember and not to forget, and to constantly dwell upon the Shabbat. Now, if it means to do so tamid, all the time, that's what Rashi says, Tanu lev lizkor tamid at Yom HaShabbat. Take note, take care, be focused always on Yom HaShabbat. By definition, it follows, therefore, that this is not referring to an action that one is to do specifically on Shabbat. If this is something that you are being told by the Torah that you must do tamid, always, then it is not something that you only do one day of the week on Shabbat. So Rashi says the meaning of this pasuk is Tanu lev lizkor tamid at Yom HaShabbat. Focus on and remember at all times Yom HaShabbat. In other words, even during the week, not just on Shabbat. And Rashi gives an example. Rashi says, She'im nizdamen lach hefes yafeh, if a very beautiful, aesthetic article comes your way, the hefetz means it could be any article. For example, it could be a beautiful cup or glass or set of glasses or tableware or anything at all that one uses in the house, for example. If such a fine, beautiful article comes your way, teheh mazmino leShabbat, put it aside, set it aside for the Shabbat. In other words, make it special for the Shabbat. Make use of that thing specifically on Shabbat in order to turn the Shabbat into a special day. That this should be another indication of, and another way of making the Shabbat special and outstanding and different from all other days. That is the Perush of Rashi on this pasuk. And the Maharam Prague, in his Perush on Rashi on the Torah, called Gur Aryeh, writes as follows. He says, Inyan ha-makor, this form of the verb, zochor, she'eno moreh al zaman, it does not refer to any particular time, not future, not present, not past. It is simply the concept of remembering, of awareness. Therefore, says the Maharal, seeing that this term, zochor, is simply a description, a reference to the idea and the fact of remembering, of awareness, of recalling and not forgetting, and seeing that it does not refer to any specific time, says the Maharal, وَإِن بَلَشَّون زَي مَشْمَعْ زَمَان مِيُحَدْ رَكْ عَسِيَةَ الْپُعُولَةِ لَخَخْ نِخْتَاv كَان بَلَشَّون مَكْור. That is why it is written in this fashion, using this form of the verb. מפני שרוצה לומר תנו לב לזכור תמיד את יום השבת, שזהו עשות הפעולה, ואין זמן מיוחד לזה. ולכך הוא תמיד. It is not to be understood as referring to any particular action or any specific time. It is something that you are to be doing all the time, that is to say, essentially all your life. Because the Shabbat is to be understood, has to be understood as a central pillar of the Torah. the Maharal adds at the end, Zehu Perusha Amiti. This is the true meaning of what Rashi says and what the Pasuk says. I believe that in those last words, Zeh Perusha Amiti, the Maharal is obliquely referring to the Perush of Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi on Rashi, where he does say something similar to the Maharal, but also in some ways slightly different. I don't want to go into the details of that now, and I think that's what he's referring to. The simple, straightforward meaning of Rashi is as Maharal explains, and this is also explicitly stated in another Perush on Rashi, on the Torah, called Be'er Rehovoth. So that is the meaning of the Pasuk according to Rashi. And we find the very same explanation in another Pasuk, and in Rashi's Perush on that Pasuk. I refer to Shemot Yud Gimel Gimel, Exodus 13:3. Vayomer Moshe el Ha'am. Moshe said to the people, Zochor hayom hazeh asher yosatem miMisraim mibet avodim. Remember this day, although again the more correct translation would be constantly aware of this day when you left Egypt. And Rashi says here, on these words, Zachor et hayom hazeh, remember or be aware constantly of this day when you left Egypt. Rashi says, Limev, this pasuk teaches us, Shemazkirim yetziat Mitzrayim b'chol yom. In other words, Rashi is explaining to us that this pasuk and a couple of other pasukim, similar pasukim in the Torah, this pasuk is the basis for the halachot, the statements by the Chachamim, by the sages, who taught us that we are to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, on a daily basis in our prayers, when we recite Kriyat Shema, and on a number of times each day, in Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, etc. We are constantly making mention of Yetziat Mitzrayim. The basis for this is the fact that the verb is zochor, with the chametz under the zayin. In other words, the makor, the makor, the general, unspecified, and in terms of time, non-specific form of the verb. It doesn't refer to a future time or a past time or even a short present, but rather it refers to a constant, ongoing action or thought that we are to be aware of and constantly remind ourselves of Yetziat Mitzrayim all the time, every day. Not on a particular day of the week or a particular time of the year. It is true that the Hag, the festival of Pesach, of Passover, is specifically connected to and dedicated to this awareness and this remembrance. But we are required by the Torah to do so on a daily basis, on a constant basis. And this is what Rashi points out in this pasuk. And here too, the Maharal, in his Perush Gur Aryeh on Rashi, explains in exactly the same vein as we saw before. He writes, this word Zachor is the Makor, he says, Uferusho b'lashon hoeh tamid, Komo Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, as we explained in the previously with regards to that pasuk. Sheperusho alechem lizkor tamid et Yom HaShabbat. You are required to be constantly aware of and do different things to not allow the concept and the essence of Shabbat and what it represents. You're not to allow this to escape your notice for any length of time. And therefore we see that this is how we are to understand the term Zachor in that form, in the Makor, in the general and uninflected form of the verb, wherever it appears. It is not specifically so with regards to the pasuk that we began this shi'ur with, the pasuk referring to Shabbat, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat leqadasho. This is true also of this pasuk, Zachor et hayom hazeh, remember this day when you left Mitzrayim, and it is true of other pasukim as well. And this understanding of the word, of the term zachor, the form of the verb, in that makor form, that general uninflected form of the verb, is not unique to Rashi. We find also, for example, that Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch Zetzal, in his Perush on the Torah, writes in a very similar vein. In fact, he explains precisely like Rashi, but he expands and further deepens our understanding of this concept. He writes as follows. He says, the form of the verb, zachor, which is a miswath aseh, which is a positive commandment, what does it come to tell us? He says, sha'alenu la'asoth ma'asim sheyahdiru el libenu, that we are instructed by this pasuk, because of the form of a verb, to do various things, to take various actions, sheyahdiru el libenu, in order that we instill in our hearts et devar hayom hazeh u'mashma'uto, the importance and significance of this day. In other words, it does not apply, this pasuk does not refer to a specific action or one particular miswah, but rather it is a general instruction to be constantly aware of Shabbat, both on Shabbat and during the week, every day, on a constant basis. And Rav Hirsch goes on to say, وَلَا نَعْمَارْ زَخَور بَلَشَنْ سِوُي, the verb is not written zachor with a shava under the zayin, which would be the imperative, the command form of the verb, because then it could be understood to refer to a specific action. If you do this particular thing, then you are remembering Shabbat, and that would apply, one assumes, to doing so on the day of Shabbat itself. Ela zachor with the kames under the zayin, that is the form of the verb, shehu surat hapo'al lolo hagdarat zaman. This is the form of the verb which has no reference and no specificity in terms of time. In other words, says Rav Hirsch, tehulat ha-miswah hazot eina mughberet lemeshech hayom. This miswah does not apply only to the day of Shabbat itself, that you are to remember and be aware of the day, the importance, the meaning of this day, and what we are to internalize on a weekly basis, once a week. No, it does not mean simply do this every Shabbat. Ela horegat mimenu umistara'at al kol hayomim. This refers to all days, all of the time, all our lives, in fact. And Rav Hirsch goes on to point out that several halachot, several statements by Hazal with regards to Shabbat, have their basis in this form of the verb zachor, in this pasuk, such as the miswah of kiddush at the beginning of Shabbat, on Ler Shabbat, on the night when Shabbat begins, the end of Friday, and other halachot as well. And all of these concepts are included within the purview, within the concept of zachor in the general sense. In other words, from this term, many halachot and many ideas and many miswath flow. Not one idea, but many. Because the aim of this pasuk and the aim of all these various miswath is to constantly increase and maintain our awareness of Shabbat and its significance and its meaning. And this is why we find in the Mechilatha Rabbi Ishmael, the Midrash Halacha on Sefer Shemoth, we find a number of statements by Hazal, all based on this word and this form of the verb zachor. One statement says zachor was shamor. We have two pesukim in the two versions of Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, one in the book of Shemoth, Exodus, and one in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. One, it says Zachor, and the other says Shamor. And here the Mechilatha states, Zachor milefano, wa Shamor mi'aharo. In other words, Mosifim mihol ala kodesh. In other words, we are to begin behaving and acting and accepting the Shabbat before it technically enters, before it begins, which is at the very end of the day on Friday, that we have to already before that time refrain from melacha, from doing anything which we may not do on Shabbat, and acting in a manner which is fitting for Shabbat. And the same is true when Shabbat ends, that we are to add a small amount of time, not even a specified amount of time, but not end Shabbat immediately the moment it ends. This is one statement based on the term zachor, because it has to do with the fact that we are very aware of the existence, the presence of Shabbat that is about to begin. And therefore, we don't wait for it to actually begin. We look forward to it, and we prepare for it, and we begin acting in a Shabbat manner before the very beginning of the Shabbat, because this is all connected to our awareness and our reverence for that day. And then, immediately, we find in the Mechillah the following statement: Zochor at Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. From this we learn, Teheh zochero me'ahad b'Shabbat. Be aware and constantly have in mind Shabbat from the very beginning of the week, from Sunday. She'im nithmala lach hefas yafa. If you come across, you find in the market, in the store, some beautiful object, something which can be used and set aside for Shabbat, teheh methakeno l'shem Shabbat. Then set it aside for the Shabbat, so that Shabbat will be honored and will be recognized and felt in the home immediately by virtue of this unique and beautiful object. This is also, of course, what Rashi quoted in his Perush on this pasuk, and Rashi, of course, is basing himself on this statement in the Mechillah. These statements, it must be understood, are not mutually exclusive. All of these statements, and the one we're about to read now, are based on the same word and the lashon, the form of the verb zochor, in that general and non-inflected, non-time specific form, because all of these ideas flow and stem from this word, and there is no contradiction between them. The next statement we find in the Mechillah, Rabbi Yitzhak Omer, Lo teheh moneh kederech she'acherim monim. Do not name, do not count the days of the week as others do. Others refer to the other nations of the world. Ela teheh moneh l'shem Shabbat. Rather, you shall refer to the days of the week in connection with Shabbat. What does that mean? According to traditional Jewish practice, the days of the week are referred to as also the months of the year, for that matter. The days of the week are referred to by number. In other words, day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. Not as all other nations, both in the past and also in the present, have done. That is to say, in English, for example, Sunday is the day connected to the sun, and Monday, of course, is the day connected to the moon, and Thursday, of course, is the day connected to the Scandinavian pagan god Thor, and Saturday, of course, is connected to the planet Saturn. And this has everything to do with the fact that all ancient peoples connected their various pagan gods, and they all had a multiplicity of such gods, with the planets that they saw in the sky. So by referring to each of these days according to the name of a certain planet, they were also therefore referring to each of these days by the name of one of their gods. The Jews, however, never acted in such a fashion. In Hebrew to this day, the days of the week do not have names other than the serial number, that is to say Yom Rishon, that is the first day of the week, Yom Sheni, the second day of the week, etc. And the last day of the week, the seventh day, Shabbat, is simply called Shabbat. There is no other term for the days of the week in Hebrew. And this has everything to do with being aware of Shabbat, and being aware, therefore, of He who commanded that we observe this day in order that we recall and internalize all the time, not just once a week on Shabbat, but at all times, every day, every moment of the day, the fact that there is a Creator who created the universe and who completed that creation and ceased all creative activity on the seventh day. And therefore, in Jewish practice, it was always Rishon b'Shabbat, the first day of the week, which was referred to as Shabbat. The week itself was also referred to as Shabbat. Sheni b'Shabbat, Shalishi b'Shabbat. One can say it in a shorter, abbreviated form and simply say Yom Rishon or Yom Sheni, the first day, the second day of the week. But the more formal way of referring to the days of the week was the first day of Shabbat, the second day of Shabbat, the third day of Shabbat. The word Shabbat also doubles as the term for the week. There is another word in Hebrew for week, which is Shavua. Shavua is from the word Sheva, which means 7. So Shavua is a span of time of 7 days. But the term Shabbat, referring to the week as a whole, is also entirely an authentic and particularly Jewish way of referring to the week. And the days of the week were referred to by Chazal always as Rishon b'Shabbat, Sheni b'Shabbat, the first day of the Shabbat or of the week, etc. So when you mention the day of the week, you are also mentioning the Shabbat. In other words, the Shabbat is constantly in our minds. And thus we are, by using that phraseology, that terminology, with reference to the days of the week and the week itself, by calling it Shabbat, we are fulfilling this mitzvah of Zochor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadosho. We are being aware of the Shabbat all the time. And here we should note the immense difference and significance in a Jew speaking and thinking in Hebrew terms, in Torah terms, that the Hebrew and the Torah go together naturally, obviously, as opposed to thinking and speaking even in non-Jewish or non-Hebrew terms. Because when an English-speaking Jew, for example, refers to a day of the week by its English name, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, he or she is, by definition, using a pagan term, and therefore a non-Torah term, and therefore a non-Jewish term. And not just non-Jewish in the sense that the name of the fifth day of the week, Thursday, is connected to the Scandinavian god of thunder, Thor. No, it's not just that fact, which is also, shall we say, bad enough, problematic enough. It's also the fact that the Jew is not thinking in Torah terms or not speaking in Torah terms, because in Hebrew we are naturally, without thinking about it, we are instinctively viewing the world, thinking about the world, and being aware of the created world and the creator of that world, even in the most mundane and straightforward and unnoteworthy aspects of our daily lives, such as referring to the days of the week. If we refer to the fifth day of the week as Thursday, that means one thing, or perhaps in the minds of many it means nothing at all, because they don't even connect it to that pagan god. But if you say Yom Hamishi, well, if it's the fifth day of the week, what does that refer to? Why is it the fifth day of the week? Why does the week begin on the first day and end on the Shabbat? And why is the week referred to as Shabbat? And even more so, if you say B'Yom Hamishi b'Shabbat, on the fifth day of the week, and the word Shabbat also refers to the concept of week, then you are connecting even that passing reference to a day of the week, you are connecting that to this fundamental understanding and worldview of Torah Judaism. So the Hebrew language itself and these essential concepts, which form the essence, the fabric and the underpinning of Jewish existence, these things are woven into the Hebrew language and are part of the Torah in a natural and organic way. Whereas if one speaks and in a different language, which we do, many of us do, and it's not sinful and not wrong to do so, and it's often necessary to do so, and it's certainly a natural thing to do if a person is brought up speaking a certain language. But we should be aware of the fact of the advantage and the difference and the significance of thinking and speaking in true Jewish terms. Having said that, let us now turn to the mitzvah of Chidush Hayom, the reciting of a special baracha on a cup of wine at the beginning of Shabbat, on Leil Shabbat. We find in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Pesachim, Kof Waw Amud Aleph, 106a, the following baraita, a Tanaic statement: Tano Rabbanan, Zachor at Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. From this, Hazal learn or derive Zochrehu al Hayain. In other words, make mention of the Shabbat and sanctify it on a cup of wine. So this too, this mitzvah of Chidush, is also learned from and derived from this general concept of Zochor, that is to say, being aware and having always uppermost in one's mind, and particularly so when Shabbat begins, at the beginning of Shabbat, on Leil Shabbat. And this mitzvah of Chidush is min HaTorah, as we find explicitly in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Berachot, Kaf Amud Bet, 20b. The statement we find here says, Noshim hayavot bechidush hayom devar Torah. Women, just as men are required to make Kiddush, if a woman lives alone, if she's widowed, or in whatever situation, a woman is hayavet to say Kiddush, just as a man would be required to say Kiddush. And the Gemara states that this is a devar Torah, this is min HaTorah. And this requires a little bit of explanation. As Rashi points out on that Gemara in Masechet Berachot, based on the Gemara, the Baraita that we mentioned from Masechet Pesachim a moment ago, the mitzvah of Chidush is based on the pasuk Zochor at Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. The general term of Zochor meaning, as Rav Hirsch explained, that it is incumbent upon us to engage in various actions and practices in order that we are always cognizant and aware of Shabbat throughout the week, and particularly so during Shabbat itself, and when Shabbat begins at the onset of nightfall, at the end of Yom Shishi, Friday. This general term of Zachor, although it does not specifically speak of what we call Kiddush, nevertheless it is derived directly from that term, and it is considered to be min HaTorah. It is not midrabanan, it is not midivrei soferim. It is not a rabbinical enactment. Rather, it is an idea, an action, one of a number of actions and of practices that we are required to do in order that we fulfill this requirement of being aware of and mindful of Shabbat. And therefore, one way of doing this is to speak, to say certain words and statements at the beginning of Shabbat, which announce to ourselves and to those with whom we sit down to the Shabbat meal that today is a very special, holy and significant day. And Rambam in Perek Kaftet, chapter 29 of Yichot Shabbat, writes as follows: Mitzvah aseh min HaTorah, it is a positive commandment, mitzvah from the Torah, לקדש יום השבת בדברים, to mention and verbally announce the fact that today is a special day, this day of Shabbat. Shene'emar, as Rambam goes on to quote the pasuk, as the pasuk states, Zochor et yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Kolomar, Rambam explains, Zochrehu zechirat shevach v'kidush. You are required to mention and make note of the holy and special status of this day in words. Now this can be done, of course, both in the Kiddush, as we are saying now, and also in the Tefillah. Therefore, the Tefillah of Leil Shabbat, when one says Tefillat Arvit on Leil Shabbat, one is performing and makes mention in that Tefillah of the fact that it is now a special and holy day known as Shabbat. We are performing this mitzvah of being zocher, or being mindful of and aware of the Shabbat. So we are performing a mitzvah aseh min haTorah when we say the Tefillat Arvit, the evening prayer on Leil Shabbat, the beginning of Shabbat. And we do the same thing again when we recite the Kiddush on a cup of wine. That which cannot be derived from the pasuk, from the words Zochor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho, is the concept of doing so in a cup of wine. And this is why Rambam goes on to say in Halacha Waw, midivrei sofarim lekadesh al hayayin ulehavdil al hayayin. The idea of doing so, saying Kiddush and also Havdalah at the end of Shabbat on a cup of wine, this is midivrei sofarim. The reason for doing so on a cup of wine is based on what we find in another place in Masechet Berachot, in the Talmud Bavli, Daf Lamed He Amud Aleph 35a, where we read, En omerim shira ela al hayayin. In other words, just as in the Mikdash, in the temple, we find that the Levim only sang songs of praise and devekuth, and expressions of closeness to Hashem, when the wine libations were poured on the Mizbeach, at the time that wine was being used in the Mikdash, that was when Shirah was said. At no other time, no other part of the sacrificial service. There was a connection between wine and praising Hashem, connecting to Hashem, and also expressing joy and a great feeling of completeness and connection with Hashem. We find in the Pesukim that wine is something which gladdens the heart, and it is also a way of expressing such joy and the special nature of an event or a time. The Pasuk in Sefer Shofatim states, Vatomer lohem hagefen, the vine said, Ehodalti et tiroshi, should I cease producing the wine which is produced from the grapes of the vine, HaMesameach Elohim va'anoshim, which gladdens both Hashem and people. How does it gladden people? Well, we know that wine tends to make people more relaxed, and is also used in all manner of celebration and festivity. This is one of the well-known functions of wine in human society. In Jewish society, it is not used for empty revelry or becoming drunk and insensate, but rather it is used as an expression of joy and celebration that we were selected and chosen by Hashem to receive His Torah, and this special day of Shabbat was given only to the Jewish people. It is a particular expression of the connection and the berith, the covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people, and this is something which is certainly worthy of celebration and of noting and emphasizing by way of a special brief but very powerful action or miswa or ceremony called kiddush. We use wine, therefore, to express joy and satisfaction and the fact that we are privileged to receive this gift of the Shabbat. We use wine in the same way that the Leviim did so in the Mikdash, when they praised and thanked Hashem and spoke of the special connection between Hashem and His people. It is important, therefore, to understand that when Rambam writes that it is a miswa min ha-Torah to recite Kiddush on Leil Shabbat, to use words and to speak of the significance, the holiness, the importance of the Shabbat, and that we are grateful to Hashem for this gift of Shabbat, which allows us to commune with Hashem in a way which is not possible during the week. When Rambam makes this statement, which is entirely accurate, it should not be understood in the narrow sense. That is to say, this pasuk, Zochor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadesho, comes to tell us to perform this mitzvah of Kiddush. As we have seen, based on all the sources that we have mentioned thus far in this shiur, that is not what the pasuk states. That is not the import of that pasuk. The pasuk tells us and instructs us to be mindful of the Shabbat in many different ways and throughout our lives, throughout the week, during Shabbat and not on Shabbat, in all manner of things that we do and say and speak, even the way we refer to the days of the week, as we said before, we connect to the Shabbat. We are mindful of the Shabbat. And one facet of that mitzvah of the Torah, of Zachor, is reciting the Kiddush. It is not the only meaning or the only thing intended by that pasuk or by that word, or by the word lekadesho. According to the Mechilatha, we learn the concept of Kiddush not from the word Zachor, but from the word lekadesho. Lekadesho bivracha, to recite, to say words of shevach, of praise, of thanks, and of expressions of our connection to Hashem and through the Shabbat and through the Torah. It is not that this pasuk refers only to Kiddush, but rather that Kiddush is one expression of the greater and all-encompassing idea of Zochor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadesho. And therefore, this topic, this mitzvah of Kiddush, and this concept of being mindful of the Shabbat throughout our lives, always, and making it a central theme in our lives, this is a perfect example of how we should understand the Torah Shebichtav and also the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Torah Shebichtav, as we said before, written in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, which is a very delicate and fine instrument of expression with almost infinite and multi-layered meanings in the text, has to be read and understood very, very carefully. And Hazal are our guides and our teachers when it comes to understanding the words and the intent of the Torah. And when we learn the statements of the Chachamim, such as the statement that we mentioned before, that women are required to say Kiddush just as men are, or to hear Kiddush, Devar Torah, and when we learn the statement that Kiddush is a mitzvah aseh min ha-Torah, based on that pasuk, Zochor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadesho, we are to understand, we must try and understand the depth of the teaching and the meaning behind those words of Hazal. They're not saying that this is the only meaning or the only intention of this pasuk. They are saying that this pasuk, these words of Zochor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadesho, should be a central theme in our lives, and we find ways of expressing this fact in many different things that we do and say. And Kiddush is one of those things. And therefore, this topic, this concept, and this mitzvah of Kiddush is a perfect example of how Torah is to be read. The Torah Shebichtav is read and to be understood. Both the Torah Shebichtav is to be understood, and the Torah Shebe'al Peh, we are to understand, try to understand the inner workings of the Torah Shebe'al Peh.
The production of these videos and maintaining this channel demands much time and money. If you enjoyed this video, please show your appreciation and support. To make a donation, please go to www.machonshilo.org and press the PayPal button, which appears on the upper right-hand side of the home page. To sponsor a video or purchase Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please write us at office@machonshilo.org.